Hello and welcome back to another KCC video. I'm Rob, and today we'll be jumping into malicious compliance. Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when the next video goes live. Our first story today comes to us from WireNut. Violate written safety procedures so we don't lose 24 million? Nope. Let's jump right in. This happened about 15 years ago at a large manufacturing plant at which I was one of 120 industrial electricians, and this happened in the department in which I was primarily responsible. These jobs pay upwards of $30 an hour, and I was making $34 an hour at the time. This was my career for decades before I retired last year. I now get a pension from them and fully paid healthcare. This wasn't just a run-of-the-mill job. This was something to take very, very seriously. Our safety administrator retired, so a new guy started and decided to audit all of the lockout tagout procedures, LOTO, everywhere in the facility. This place employed 4,000 people and was over 1.5 million square feet, so it was a massive undertaking. Many of the machines in my department were large, multi-station transfer machines, where the part goes into several drilling, milling, tapping, boring operations, and are transferred to the next station in turn between operations. Basically, the operator loads a raw part into it, and once it comes back around to him or her, it's finished. The cycle time for this machine was about 1 minute and was a key part in expensive final products, costing upwards of $50,000 each. It was made clear to me that the company lost $50,000 for every minute the machine was idle, as a way of instilling urgency as if I needed it. As I said, these machines had multiple stations that each had its own specialized operation to accomplish, all automatically. This, of course, involved many switches, buttons, computers, motors, encoders, drives, all of which are used in industrial automation and sequencing. Usually, when an electrical part broke on a particular station, I would shut down the electrical power for that one station to perform my repairs and replacements. All was good, and I could usually perform just about any repair within 15 minutes or less. The management people usually didn't even know anything unusual happened, as the operators were on piecework and would often skip a break to make up the shortfall. Until the new LOTO procedures were released for those machines, the new procedure required anyone performing repairs to LOTO every station, for every kind of energy potential. This includes electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic, and gravity. Since this was a union facility, this required the services of an electrician, a plumber, a mechanic, and a millwright. It also required something like 38 individual locks to be applied by the aforementioned skilled tradespersons. It also required about 4 to 8 hours of work to complete this task. Keep in mind, these were huge machines that would take up an area the size of a gymnasium and cost tens of millions of dollars to buy. When I saw the new LOTO procedure, I grabbed my boss and the production supervisor and showed it to them and explained in detail why this was ridiculous, unnecessary, and unworkable. My boss got the safety administrator and we all had a conference, and I was told, basically, that's the way it is. The very next day, a type of switch called a proximity switch failed on one of these machines. Normally, a 5 to 10 minute repair. Cue malicious compliance. I dutifully informed the production supervisor that he lost his machine for the rest of the shift and half of the following shift. He chuckled and said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "Dude, I'm dead serious." I got my boss, told him I needed 38 LOTO locks, a plumber, a mechanic, and a millwright. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. Remember the conversation we had yesterday? It just got real. Show me why you need 38 locks. Okay, and I brought him to the machine, pulled the 10-page illustrated, notated, laminated LOTO procedure off the machine, and counted where each and every lock needs to go. 38. And I need the other tradesmen here as well. I figure the machine will be rendered safe by the end of the shift. Matt can do the repair, and another 4 hours to remove the locks and set the machine up to be ready to run by their lunchtime. Also, keep in mind that there will be cribbing to make the gravity potential safe, and most locks need a special kind of hardware to apply to valves and other devices to be able to function correctly. Just fix it the way you usually fix it, my boss told me. Put it in writing, I said. Just fix the damn thing, was his unhelpful reply. I think you need to give it to me in writing, or you need to get my union rep here. Those are your two choices. I'm not going to get fired over this. About this time, several men in suits and ties showed up to find out what the problem is, called into action by the production supervisor I previously mentioned. He and I had a great working relationship, and he knew what was going down, so he started making phone calls when I let him know his machine was broke. To make a long story short, an hour-long meeting was held, which included my union rep, after which I was provided written permission to make the repairs as I always had. The new safety administrator had been properly scolded and learned a lesson. Management learned to just let Wirenut do his job, and the machine was running 10 minutes after I received the paper. That was a loss of $3.5 million according to their math. It would have been $24 million lost if I had to follow their procedures to the letter. All new procedures were put in place with much input from my colleagues and me. This was a test case for how the other 500 skilled tradespeople were going to be proceeding with the new safety guy, as they had also been provided with new, ridiculous Lodo procedures. It just turned out that I was the first to have to implement them. You gotta love it when some new guy with no idea how things actually work shows up and starts screwing with tried and trusted procedures. There's a difference in making it safe on paper by the textbook and actually making it safe. Our next story comes to us from Baldassier. Overtime? That's right, overtime. Let's jump right in. Here's another tale that's not mine, but I love asking people about their best malicious compliance stories, and this is one my cousin told me. He worked at an injection molding company as a machine operator, and one of his colleagues was named Danny. He was a runner. He would show up early and start up the machines before day shift arrived. He would make sure that each machine had enough raw materials and boxes for the completed products, that sort of thing. He would pull the full skids of completed product and take them to the warehouse and wrap the skids for shipments. He'd load the trucks and accept the deliveries of raw materials. He knew everyone on the factory floor and was pretty much a pivot man for the operation. Let's call the company Canco, since it was located in Ontario, Canada. They got bought out by an American company, Amco, and Amco sent up a new guy to be facility manager. Before they got bought out in 2019, Canco was struggling. Danny was an arrive early, stay late kind of guy, so he offered to bank his overtime, and Canco accepted. He got it in writing. At the end of 2019, he asked to be paid out for his accumulated overtime, which was substantial. In January 2020, the facility manager called him into the office and offered him a $6,000 annual bump in pay and increased benefits if he accepted a salaried position for 44 hours a week. Danny took it. As 2020 went on, Danny was working lots of hours and submitted an Excel sheet every week with the hours he'd actually worked. There was a column that showed hours in excess where he entered the hours in excess of 44 for the week. In the autumn of 2020, Danny approached the facility manager and asked if he wanted Danny to take his accumulated overtime as time off or to be paid out. The Amco company handbook stated that all PTO needed to be used up by the end of the year or it would be lost. The facility manager chuckled and replied, "Your salary? You don't get overtime. That's why I put you on salary." "That's not right, boss. I get overtime after 44 hours. "No, you don't. That's Amco company policy." "Yes, I do. That's Ontario labor law." Danny handed him a printout of the relevant page from the Ontario government website. The facility manager said he would look into it, but didn't. Danny pestered him, and finally, fed up, he fired off an email to the facility manager, the plant manager, Canco HR, and Amco HR as well. Eventually, he got called into a meeting with the plant manager, the facility manager, and HR. You should understand that HR was a bit of a Karen. Nobody really liked her, but she was a blabbermouth. The company tried everything to get out of paying the overtime. Danny asked, "Do I have the authority to enter into contracts on behalf of the company?" No. Do I have the authority to assign work to my colleagues or discipline them? No. Then I am not a manager or supervisor. And under Ontario labor law, these are the only people exempt from overtime. Oh, and see that total? You can multiply that by 1.5. So for every hour overtime I worked, you either pay me an hour and a half or give me an hour and a half off with pay. After the meeting, the facility manager was furious. His little scheme to get free work out of Danny didn't play, and now he looked really bad in front of his boss. Danny, beginning right now, you don't work another minute of overtime without my permission. You got that? Okay, Danny replied. Let me put that in an email. He did, and the facility manager confirmed it in a reply. Danny was arriving at 5:30 a.m., more than an hour ahead of the production team in order to unlock the doors, turn on the lights, and warm up the machines. These machines melt little beads of plastic and squirt them into molds, so they take about 45 minutes to an hour to warm up. So the next day at 2:30, Danny left and shut off his phone. There was an afternoon shift that started at 3 p.m. and a meeting with the day shift foreman, the afternoon shift foreman, the facility manager, and Danny, and there was a discussion of any issues and production targets for the shift. Since Danny wasn't there and he had the tally sheets, the afternoon shift had no idea what they were expected to produce for the shift. The next day, Danny came in early as usual, and when the facility manager arrived, he demanded to know why Danny didn't attend the meeting. Danny explained that his shift was over and he went home since he wasn't allowed overtime. That's why he shut off his phone too. He can't do company work on his off hours. That's overtime. The facility manager said that Danny's attendance at the meeting was mandatory, so Danny suggested that the only way for that to happen would be to adjust his working hours. The facility manager then changed his hours to 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., effective immediately, and put it in an email at Danny's insistence. Later that day, there was a delivery that arrived at 3 p.m., and Danny wasn't there to unload it, so they had to turn it away and have them return in the morning. The next day, Danny arrives at 8 a.m. as instructed, only to be met by a furious day shift foreman. When the foreman arrived, the entire production staff was in the parking lot as the doors were locked. He opened up, let them in, and then had to wait around for almost an hour, producing nothing, as the heating coils on the machines came up to temperature. The facility manager arrived in the middle of this bollocking, and Danny simply pointed at him and said, "He changed my hours to an 8 a.m. start, didn't he tell you?" This turned the wrath onto the facility manager, who now had to take responsibility for a 12 to 15% drop in production for the day. There were also occasional Saturdays when the company fell behind, only Danny wouldn't be there to bring the machines raw materials or take away finished product. That would turn into a clusterfuck too. So the facility manager gave in and gave Danny blanket authorization to work any overtime required. The raise he got to bump his salary ended up boosting his pay by $2.75 an hour, but the only downside was that Danny couldn't bank it. It was paid out each check. The kicker, remember Karen, the blabbermouth from HR? Somehow, and nobody knows exactly how, word got around the office that anyone who wasn't a manager was entitled to OT, and they all started submitting timesheets that included it. This is another textbook case of a manager not being able to manage because they don't know the jobs of the people they're supposed to be managing. It's always nice to watch a manager get knocked down a couple of pegs. Thank you to both OPs for posting their stories in the Malicious Compliance subreddit. They are linked in the description below. Please go check them out. Check out one of these other videos, and if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories.